The Economic Development and Small Business Subcommittee on Housing will come to order. Good morning. Would the clerk please call the roll?
Chair Grant.
Here.
Representative Stevendorf. Scott. Present. Andrews. Cernglue. Here. Aragona.
Here.
Zorn. Fink. DeBoyer.
Here.
Madam Chair, you have 5 members present. You do have a quorum.
Thank you. We have Representative Scott that moves to adopt the minutes from the meeting on February 8th. Thank you. The meeting minutes from February 8th are adopted. Okay, thank you. First today, we have 2 presentations from organizations who have been engaged in the housing crisis that we're facing here in Michigan. So really excited to hear about the projects and the different ways that they are addressing housing. First, we will hear from Glenn Wilson and Joel Arnold from Communities First. If you all will join us, and we're happy to have you. All right, we're ready whenever you are. If you just push that red button so we can hear you.
Yeah, just trying to make sure I got my notes together here. I think I was showing up as last originally, but I'm ready to go. They say stay ready so you don't have to get ready, right? Yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much for having us here today. We're honored to be in front of you all. Some of you I've had an opportunity to speak with in the past. Just seeing you around the community at different events and or activities. But I'm Glenn Wilson, President and CEO, co-founder of Communities First. The other person that's not here with me that helped start Communities First is Essence Wilson, which is my wife, but also our Chief Strategy Officer. That was also very instrumental in helping to co-found Communities First now 14 years ago. So thank you so much for having us. Pretty much what I'm going to start off with is because I really want to just have a quick opportunity to just say a little quick story about myself and as far as where Communities First kind of came from. And then we're going to go through a presentation and then talk about some very specific things. So we're going to talk about, a little my story, talk a little about Communities First, and then we're going to kind of end with some specific projects that we're working on or things that we're in support of. As well from a policy perspective. That kind of lets you know where we're going. But in 2010, there's definitely a housing crisis around that time where a lot of people were experiencing things when it comes to foreclosures. My mom was a part of that perspective just a few years earlier, right on the front end, and experienced foreclosure. With a home, and actually one of the homes that I grew up in. And then also earlier in my life, around 1992, we had a house fire. And I was 7 years old. My brother, my sister, and my cousin were in that house fire, along with me. And I was the only one to get out. I saw my mom and my dad and the devastation that they experienced. But we had to go live in a hotel for several months. And I remember those several months, how difficult it was, living out of bags, living that lived experience. And then also then having the experience later with the home that we actually ended up moving into. My parent thought that they were in a good mortgage situation and didn't realize they were in a bad type of mortgage situation. And couldn't pay the mortgage when it went from being, when it was one of the subprime mortgages. So I've had a couple, spouts with it, and then also just as an entrepreneur at a particular time, growing a business, doing some particular things, as an entrepreneur. I experienced some different times where I had to sleep on a buddy's couch, for a few weeks to get something figured out. So it's always been, for me is that, as I began to learn more and more about this, even through my entrepreneurship journey, I've always been an entrepreneur and finding ways to solve problems. I always just made it a thing that, I'm not going to be homeless again. I'm always going to make sure that I'm trying to make money and do particular things. And, some things went very successful for me. And then I had an opportunity to try to say, well, what can we do to really solve some problems in our community? Because a lot of people weren't being heard. At the time, I was doing some more medical work, home care, medical. I was a part of a group. And we would go out to these communities and see how people were living, the conditions that seniors were living in, conditions that people with disabilities, our veterans that we were serving with physical therapy, occupational therapy, and different services. And I was seeing that there was definitely a big disconnect between the housing that people needed versus the housing that they were receiving. And then also from a community perspective, seeing the things that just weren't getting done. So as you see, Communities First, we were founded, right in the time where people was like, why are you starting this organization? 2010, because people's voice needed to be heard. And that's where the name came from, Communities First. We're guided by equity, innovation, collaboration, and we respond to immediate community needs. So as an organization, we show up, and we show up in times where other people don't want to show up. We prioritize health and human-centered design. And our mission, as you see, is to build healthy, vibrant communities through economic development, affordable housing, and innovative programming. And we'll get through a few of these slides quite quickly. The organization has grown quite quickly. And when I say quickly, over 14 years. But we serve Michigan and Indiana. We serve approximately about 35,000 people individually across the state. We have over 500 units of safe, affordable housing. We've generated more than $60 million in community investments. And then also, it's very important for us, we have over 250 members of volunteer members that we serve with over 5,000 hours. So we have a lot of organizations and people that volunteer with us to help us do the work. It's more than just housing for us, but it's about programming and making sure, because I tell people all the time, we don't, and you'll probably hear Joel say this again, but we don't just build housing, but we think about building community. We don't warehouse people, but we actually truly think about building communities. And what's important is because some people look at developers, or even though we're nonprofit organizations, like, where does your resources go? If you are making some type of, where does your bottom line? We pump it a lot into our programs. To make sure that the people that are living in our communities are having a good quality, having a quality of life, making sure they have job opportunities. So our engaged communities is about innovative arts, culture, and environmental programming. So we host an event called Movies Under the Stars that we've been hosting for almost 9 years. We do that in Flint, Saginaw, and Detroit. This was at the Atwood Stadium in the city of Flint. I think we had over probably almost 3,000 people at this one. But we give a free, event through the summer in all these cities where you get free popcorn, candy, ice cream, pizza. You don't pay for anything. If people want to make a donation, they can. So all our programs are free. We really believe in having, we talk about community, all types of communities, families. What does that look like to them? We also host African-American film series that we've been hosting for several years as well, talking about topics that have to do with communities. And it can be anything from mental health, health conscious, rowing, anything that we can do, economic development, and we bring in speakers as well to talk about these particular topics, about things that have to do with their particular community. So everything is intentional. And also with our Culture Shock program, we took families from Flint, Saginaw, and Detroit. We rented out tall ships to take families out into the bay areas, Detroit River, renting out tall ships to get people to understand what the environment looks like. We just took families, right in one of the last cold days in February, we took families from Flint, Saginaw, Detroit to Mount Holly to experience skiing. We go to symphonies, museums all across. We go to the sand dunes and on the west side of the state. Anywhere that you can think of that people haven't had experiences, we make sure that we try to provide those things. Oh, did I just go back? Sorry, I don't know why it's going back the other way. Sorry about that. Why is it not going back?
Get the speed version.
It's not going back for some reason.
Let's do this.
You want to do that? All right, so then we have our civic engagement. We do a lot of work around civic engagement about making sure that we're finding ways to get people to register to vote. We don't tell people how to vote, but we want to make sure that people have access to it. We track information and data, so we're real big on data because we want to do comparisons to see, because a lot of people say that individuals that live in rental housing is not engaged in the political process. And actually, that's incorrect. But we have data to support that that's actually an incorrect statement, because we heard it so much from legislators and different people say, oh, I'm not going to go knock on these people's doors because, you know, they're not engaged. They don't own homes in this particular community. But people want to know what's going on in their community. People want to be engaged. People just have to ask them. People just have to ask the question or make the information available. So we're all about making sure that we're making information available. And we've had things with Secretary of State. We work with our local legislators. We've done some things around redistricting. We engage thousands of people to get people out. We don't tell people which way to go, but we're going to make sure we provide information to not just our residents, but people also in the greater community. And we have a lot of different tenant programs as well, as you see, as far as when it comes to our fall festival. This is something that we were holding at our Gray Street property, where we gave out mums, did free mulching, landscaping to the different properties that we had out there in the communities. We had, bounce houses. There's always activities. There's always something going on where families can come together and experience something that they haven't possibly experienced. One particular story that I can share with you about one of the tenants. You want to do that at the end? Okay, I can wait to do that. And then also we have our Community Enrichment Center. I can talk about the tenant later. But Community Enrichment Center, which is the CEC, which is a building that we're bringing together, which is a Center for Family and Social Economic Mobility, which is all about wealth creation, about a place where people can come learn about anything that they need to learn about leadership, wealth creation. We have banking partners, other resources, where we're bringing a lot of things that we were doing in different parts of the community together in one place and in one roof, so people can come there and get the resources from the greater community. So not only are we serving our residents, but we're also serving the greater community as well.
I'm sorry, Mr. Wilson. I'm going to jump in really quickly because I don't want to miss the housing content that you guys have. Yep. So and just so that you know, we have to move to our next presentation about 10:50. So I want to make sure you get to the housing piece.
Oh, okay. All right.
So we'll talk, these are all programs that we work on that are sort of economic development related, that we, again, really believe in building holistic communities. But in talking about real estate development, we're big believers that we try and do a lot of investment in spaces where other folks often don't invest. And so a couple of things here, that we work with every day. I'm sure that Mr. Director Hovey has been here noting these points already, but we're short 190,000 units in our state today, just for static population. With almost 9,000 of our neighbors experiencing homelessness in a given year. And across that, we've seen this get quite a bit worse over the last decade. So we've seen the average sale price go up 84%. I don't know that many people whose wages have gone up 84%. And so this is getting less and less affordable. And we know that the just sheer number of homes available on the market are dropping. So we'll just show a couple of examples of properties in Flint and around the state that we've done. Coolidge Park was a vacant and abandoned school closed by the Flint Community Schools. Is now home to 54 units of quality affordable housing. Oak Street School, similar story, now home to 24 units of affordable senior housing. Swayze was yet another vacant and abandoned building, now home to 36 units of mixed income housing. And this is my favorite part of this presentation because we could do this all day, before and after. Berkeley Place was a burned out sort of strip mall, now home to 33 new homes. And this, we were lucky enough to just open with state support back in the end of December, the Grand End University, which is 48 units of housing. So all of these are projects that we've been working on, not just in Flint, but just a few miles from here on the south side of Lansing, the Philip Dean Apartments, the Orchard Lane Apartments, supported with some funding from MISHDA's Missing Middle program that this body and the legislature were kind enough to support, is now rehabbing 45 formerly vacant units of housing. in Detroit, where you have a 34-unit development on the west side of the city. And then we just broke ground here on the west side of Flint on 74 new units of housing at the Orchard Lane and Orchard Manor apartments. With some developments coming along the line in Detroit, Grand Blanc, Flint, because we know that the housing crisis is really dire and getting worse every day that we don't add more units. So we want to close with a couple of personal stories from tenants, but especially while we're in front of this committee, we want to make sure that we do touch on what can be done. And as landlords, you know, we're very strong supporters of House Bills 4062 and 4063, which would ban discrimination based on source of income. We don't discriminate based on source of income at our properties, and we manage about 500 units in the state of Michigan. One thing that we also want to always touch on is, right, there's cost sides of this, which is just how do we subsidize people who can't afford units, but there's also the supply side. And we know a lot of our places in Michigan, it is very challenging or even sometimes illegal to build the kinds of housing that people want, whether that's duplexes or triplexes or those kinds of units, and that drives up cost. And also funding. The fact of the matter is, right now in our state, to build just a 1,500 square foot single family house costs about $300,000 just on construction. So that's a gap that we know a lot of people can't afford to actually purchase a house at that price. So conversations about how do we lower building costs is really, really important. But I know we have just a few tenant pieces we want to touch on.
And then also just from multifamily, you know, very similar, if not a little bit higher. The thing is, you're just able to spread the costs out and leverage the dollars against low-income housing tax credits. And when we was just talking about additional funding, we do have, you know, some current projects that are just, you know, funding requests that we just have out there for the Masonic Temple. The one is the Marion Masonic Temple in downtown, but for housing, it's Marion Hall mixed-use housing redevelopment that we're seeking around $1.5 million. But it's a downtown Flint development that's focused on affordable housing, about 133 units. We're looking at this as more like we call it as a pre-gentrification strategy, is to make sure that we're putting in affordable units in places where major investment is taking place. It's a development 130 East Grand Boulevard that's in District 10, which is a development right there on the corner of Grand Boulevard and Jefferson, right at the entry of Belle Isle. Hokum School, which is on the Upper West Side of Detroit as well. So, I mean, we have, you know, projects right now that we're currently working on, and when he was talking about construction costs, and as we're talking about that, we want to make sure that we increase those abilities to do things. As far as from a tenant perspective, I'll just read one quick story, and we'll leave with this. But it says, his name is Ken, but living at Swayze Court Apartments, I have a base and a supportive community to work from. And I can go out in the world and know I always have a place to come back to call home. I know that enjoying the residents at Swayze's are always willing to help me in any way they can. I like to give back to them as well, whether it be playing music for them or sharing a meal. I'm cooking, eating healthy foods. I learned a lot working at the farmer's market this past year. I have been sober for a year. I feel fantastic. I don't know if I would have been able to do that without the resources and help I received from CFI. My goal is also to maintain sobriety for life, and I also want to start a family, continue with my employment goals, and someday buy a house. And then just to add this additional, Ken also was an original resident advocate at Swayze for voter education and registration. So he also helped CFI do voter outreach and to get people registered with voting. That was individuals that were homeless or people that was in shelters and different things of that nature. So, you know, individuals want to give back. They just need the opportunity, the funnel, and the vessel to do that. So thank you so much for having us. And if you have any questions, please let us know.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your presentation and your work. Are there any questions? Okay, well, thank you very much for being here.
Thank you.
Next, we have Molly Smith from Avalon and Catherine. Oh, I'm sorry. Yes. Is it Molly Smith and Avalon, or you have one presenter? But both of you, yes, sorry. From the Corporation for Supportive Housing. Please join us. Thank you, Molly and Catherine, for being here, and you're welcome to start.
Okay, awesome. Thank you for having us. So I'm Catherine Distrauss. Is that okay? Okay. With the Corporation for Supportive Housing. And I'm joined by Molly Smith with Avalon Housing. And so we're grateful for the opportunity to talk with you today about supportive housing and just kind of give you a little bit of an overview about what it is kind of from a statewide perspective and also from a local perspective with a local provider of supportive housing. How do I advance the slides on here? Oh, there we go. Okay. We can just skip right past that. Okay, so at its core, supportive housing combines affordable housing with services that help people who face the most complex challenges to live with stability, autonomy, and dignity. And so really the target population for supportive housing is people who have been chronically homeless, so meaning that they've been homeless for a year or more and have some type of disabling condition. And so that's what makes the services piece of supportive housing so important, and really what makes supportive housing different from affordable housing is the target population that's in need of supportive services and the services that are provided in housing. So there's different types of supportive housing as well. There might be like scattered site supportive housing where a subsidy sort of follows the person to a unit within the community, or single site or site-based supportive housing, which might be what you think of typically as like a typical apartment building where somebody lives, where it's 100% supportive housing. There's also, I just want to mention quickly on kind of like the costs of developing and operating supportive housing. So there's three key factors that are considered related to the cost of developing a supportive housing project. One is capital, so sort of what it takes to actually build the project, kind of the bricks and mortar. The second one is the operating costs, so what it takes to keep the building running, so like maintenance, property management, that kind of thing. And then the third is services, and again, that's sort of what really makes it different from affordable housing. And the services piece, I would say too, is the piece that has been the most challenging to fundraise for over time, both within the state of Michigan and throughout the country. So just a little bit of data to share with you all related to homelessness broadly and the supportive housing population. So in 2022, there were 32,589 folks who experienced homelessness in the state of Michigan. 46% of them were Black or African American, despite that population being only 14% of Michigan's overall population. So we definitely see some huge racial disparities within the homeless population. And then a little over 6,000 folks experienced chronic homelessness in 2022. And that's really the kind of target population that we're talking about for supportive housing. So so not everybody who's homeless needs supportive housing, but folks who are chronically homeless is kind of that target population that really needs those intensive services. And then we also see some huge social impacts and cost offsets when supportive housing is implemented in Michigan and throughout the country. So the data that you can see here is based on a supportive housing project out of Denver. And there was kind of a longitudinal study there that showed a 30% decrease in jail stays once people were stably housed in their supportive housing program, and a 40% decrease in emergency room visits. And that was ultimately resulted in a $6,875 cost offset per person. And so in that way, we really think about supportive housing being like good for the individual that's in it, and also good for the community and good for the system. And then in your packets, you also just have a list of all of the supportive housing providers throughout the state. So I'm not going to go through all of these, but just wanted to provide this to you so that you kind of understand the breadth of supportive housing throughout the state and kind of the number of units that folks are providing. And then the last piece that I just wanted to mention before turning it over to Molly is just kind of the statewide policy priorities related to supportive housing. So The first and foremost is increasing funding for supportive services. So as I mentioned before, that's been the piece that's been the trickiest to fundraise for, not just in Michigan, but all throughout the country. So we do have a $27 million budget request that we're pursuing within the state of Michigan. We are grateful to Governor Whitmer for her support on this issue and the inclusion of funding in the 2024 supplemental request, and are continuing to work on the increasing funding for services. The second one is changes to Medicaid policies. So in addition to seeking general fund support for supportive services, Medicaid is also a key strategy to be able to fund supportive services. And so there are some services that are provided that are reimbursable through Medicaid. So there's just some policy changes that would need to happen at the state level in order to really be able to maximize that as a resource. And then the third thing is reducing housing barriers. So I think the folks from Communities First spoke to a few of the bills that are in play related to reducing some of the housing barriers, but then also HB 4878, the Fair Chance Access to Housing Bill, is just another one that I would highlight, which is really thinking about like reducing barriers related to criminal history and kind of looking at people's criminal history a little bit differently. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Molly Smith from Avalon Housing.
Thanks, Catherine. Hi, I'm Molly Smith. I'm the Director of Services with Avalon Housing. We are a nonprofit real estate developer, property owner, and supportive service provider. Our mission is to build healthy, safe, and inclusive supportive housing communities as a long-term solution to homelessness. So our work is rooted in housing first. This is an evidence-based approach that prioritizes placement into immediate and safe housing without preconditions. We recognize housing as a basic human right, and our 30-plus years of experience has really shown us that housing is that foundation for stabilization going forward. We develop and manage units of affordable housing throughout Washtenaw County. We're also providing services and partnering with our local housing authority, the Ann Arbor Housing Commission, and also provide supportive services to individuals living within the private landlord market with housing subsidies. We're able to ensure permanent affordability for our tenants by financing our projects through low-income housing tax credits, grants, and then rental subsidies to offset that cost. So this permanent affordability paired with ongoing services is what's known as supportive housing, and it's what makes our housing program so successful. Like other communities across the state, Washtenaw County utilizes a coordinated entry process as a standardized way of meeting the immediate and long-term needs of those at risk or experiencing homelessness. This process provides centralized intake, assessment, and then allows us to refer people to a resource based on their needs. That might look like diversion, financial support to prevent eviction, or for individuals and families experiencing homelessness, a referral to what's known as permanent supportive housing. And so individuals and families in Washtenaw County who are experiencing chronic homelessness have low incomes and disabling conditions such as physical or behavioral health conditions are prioritized for PSH. Yeah, thanks. So we take all of our PSH referrals through coordinated entry and are housing the most vulnerable and most in need in our community. Currently, that's over 800 individuals and families, 200 of which are children. And all of our PSH clients are at or below 30% AMI. So currently in Washtenaw County, that's roughly $25,000 for a one-person household. And to just give a little perspective, the annual average household income for an Avalon tenant living in PSH is roughly $8,000, and more than 50% of these households are surviving on less than $800 a month. More than 55% of our clients face challenges related to active substance use, mental illness, which includes trauma that is often resulting from the experience of homelessness, and over 30% are dealing with chronic health conditions. So our supportive housing model combines what's called enhanced property management with services to support the unique and individual needs of our tenants. Our teams really approach things creatively to engage tenants around skill building lease obligations such as paying rent, maintaining safe unit conditions, and conflict resolution, both to support the individual as well as the larger community. So housing stabilization is our top priority after move-in, but that's often not a quick or linear journey. We are peeling back layers of trauma and also repairing mistrust with a group of people that have been marginalized and underserved for a very long time. And building that trust really takes time. So our services really aim to kind of get to know someone, build that rapport, make those connections, and then focus on issues that are directly related to housing stability. This helps people improve their quality of life by eliminating barriers to accessing needed care and resources in the community. Can you go back for one moment?
Yep.
We offer a wide range of services, as you can see, really primarily focused around case management. We talked about some of those lease issues. We do have 24/7 on-call crisis response that we offer both to our tenants as well as clients that we serve within the private market. And we coordinate closely with our local community mental health and crisis team to offset the need for emergency services where possible. We also provide in-home support such as cooking, cleaning, medication management. This is a really important eviction prevention strategy for a majority of our folks, primarily those who are struggling with mobility issues, behavioral health issues such as hoarding, and then for our aging in place adults so that they can maintain independent living for as long as they're able. And we have an integrated care program that we've really been building out since 2016, and that is in partnership with our local federally qualified health center, Packard Health, to deliver primary care and behavioral health services tailored to the needs of our residents. So our provider partners are seeing people in their homes. They're seeing people in 2 medical clinics that are co-located within our supportive housing communities. And this approach has really significantly improved access and engagement in ongoing care. We're also working with families to develop skills, coordinate with school systems, and provide support and advocacy around parenting and child welfare issues. And we also offer a number of recovery-oriented peer services. Okay. We know that beyond safe and affordable housing and support to get basic needs met, what people really want and need is community and a sense of belonging. I realize that my slide is out of order here, so sorry. One more? There we go. Sorry. And so our community building programs provide resources and opportunities for this social connection. Okay, now can you go back?
Yep.
Thank you. Okay, so we are currently, we own and operate 29 sites across Ann Arbor, Chelsea, and Dexter. We have 4 new developments in the pipeline that are going to bring more than 150 new units of affordable housing to the community. The ongoing development of supportive housing has really enabled us to make strides toward ending chronic homelessness in Washtenaw County. In 2021, we saw a 31% reduction in chronic homelessness through the addition of Hickory Way, which is a 70-unit, 1-bedroom supportive housing development in Ann Arbor. And the impact is not in our supportive housing developments alone. From 2020 to 2022, we helped 568 people exit homelessness, both within our housing stock as well as into public housing and into the private market with those rental subsidies that I mentioned. And so, you know, the cost of services is high, it's expensive. It costs roughly $11,000 annually to provide housing and services for one person at Avalon. And this does require an ongoing investment, but the return on that investment is far greater than the cost of what it takes to keep one person in emergency shelter annually. And we know that supportive housing works, and when it's funded adequately, it's highly effective. This is demonstrated in our 94% housing retention rate, which is compared to the 86% national average. Okay. So there are gaps in resources. As I've mentioned, sustainability requires ongoing investment. Supportive housing is not a one-size-fits-all approach. People have various needs, and our effectiveness lies within our ability to adapt and expand the model to best practices based on what we learn along the way and from others doing this work. We have internally seen an increase in needs both in terms of resources as well as the intensity of supportive services required to support housing stability. In post-pandemic, we've experienced, like others, this is not unique to Avalon, experienced a significant workforce shortage and have had to make significant financial investments in recruitment and retention of our staff. So Avalon is fortunate to have been selected as one of the grantees in Michigan to participate in the PSH pilot to demonstrate the impact and effectiveness of supportive services. We are coming up on the end of year one this summer of that pilot, and this has really allowed us to do a lot organizationally. Funding our programs adequately has allowed us to decrease our caseload sizes from, we were roughly at a 25-to-1 client to staff ratio, and we've been able to reduce those to a 10-to-1 ratio, which has allowed us to really deliver services needed by each person to support housing stability. We've been able to bring a lot of quality training and really skill up our staff to be able to meet needs and support our outcomes. So we're hopeful to have some of our outcomes preliminary this summer, but these are the measures of success that we're really looking at. Sorry, I should have said what they were. Housing stability, really increasing access to health insurance and healthcare in general, and then working with folks on income. That may look like employment. That may also look like getting supplemental income to meet the needs of a disability. And then I've just added a tenant testimony here, if you have time to read through it, just someone who moved into that Hickory Way development that I mentioned and just was open and willing to share the impact that it's had on his life. Thank you.
Thank you both so much for sharing the work that you all do and also sharing some information for the community that you serve as well. Do we have any questions from the committee? We have Representative Fink.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I actually just want to state for the record that I'm very familiar with Avalon's work. The law firm with which I'm still associated, although no longer an owner, has performed work in court for Avalon. I don't understand there to be a specific ask of the committee. I don't think we have any kind of a conflict interest or anything based on what you brought forward today. I just want to offer that information for purposes of disclosure, but also to kind of maybe offer a little bit of my own perspective that Avalon does incredible work for people who are on hard times, and that I've seen the success that supportive housing can have. And so I very much appreciate it. And if we do come up with some kind of a request or something like that, then obviously we'll have to revisit the issue. But at the moment, I just wanted to say thank you for being here and to offer that testimony. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Okay, thank you very much for your time. Next, we will take up testimony on House Bill 5236, and we have Representative Reingans, who is bringing this bill forward. Thank you very much.
Okay. Good morning, Madam Chair and members of the committee. I am really thrilled to be following Avalon because I followed them for a lot of years in my community, and they're great. So you really learned a lot today from them. So I am here today to talk about HB 5236, which is a modification of the Truth in Renting Act. And the reason that I know this bill is needed to make sure that renters know our rights as renters as far and access resources about legal protections and resources is because I myself am also a renter. So I have been a renter in Ann Arbor for almost 20 years now because the city is really hard to buy in. And I've been a social worker most of that time or a student, so it's really hard to save up a lot of money doing those jobs. So I continue to be a renter, and as an individual and family now, it's really important for us to know our rights to legal resources and local 211 services. So this legislation would make sure that renters are informed of those rights and those resources, and would work between the State Court Administrative Office and MSHDA to develop a form that renters would be receiving as part of our leases. it is nice, in Ann Arbor, students do have access to legal resources on campus, but even though the city of Ann Arbor is more than half renters, not all of those renters are students. I myself am not a student. So if I wanted to have legal support, where could I go? So it's really important for us to receive this information as part of the process of becoming a renter and a tenant. So this Truth in Renting Act will remove some barriers that are disproportionately experienced by people of color, people with disabilities, seniors, and people of lower socioeconomic status. It'll also make sure that we get access and information about 211 that can help mitigate the circumstances that could lead to homelessness. So knowing our rights and the services available to us will be really important for our quality of life, and it will decrease unnecessary stress, and it will ensure that our living situation is stable. So thank you, Madam Chair, for hearing 5236. And shall I turn it over to my co-conspirator here, or should I take questions?
All right, Rep. Devendorf, do we have some clarifying points to give, or?
My testimony speaks a bit to both of them, but I can wait on it
Yeah,
if
I'd
you
like
wanted
to, yep, let's just speak to this bill for now.
I'm
Okay.
happy to talk about it. Yeah.
Wonderful. Do we have any questions on this bill? Yes.
My question, my initial question is, currently the law requires there to be a notice in a lease agreement that a tenant has rights under the Truth in Renting Act. Does your bill remove the requirement to have that notice, given that there's instead going to be an addendum with, walking through what those rights are? And I guess the reason I'm wondering if it might be a good idea is just because a person might not understand that these two concepts are collapsed. I mean, that the notice and talking about the Truth in Renting Act in the body of the lease and the addendum are talking about the same thing.
Personally, I don't think that it is bad to have it in both places, or to have the information more than once. But this bill, if you read it, it doesn't remove the requirement for that to still be in the lease, from how I understand this. And maybe you have a clarification, but I don't think it removes that requirement.
Okay, thank you.
Do we have any other questions on this bill? We are going to take public comment on both bills at the end of testimony for both bills. So if there are no further questions, then we will begin testimony on House Bill 5237. I would like to notify members that there is a draft substitute for this bill that has been shared with you, and that is what we will be hearing testimony on today, is the substitute. And I will hand it over to Representative Devendorf.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I will talk fast because I would love for us to have a chance to get to our housing advocates and stakeholders. Members of the Housing Committee, I speak in strong support of my bill, House Bill 5237, which seeks to establish a right to counsel for tenants facing eviction and similar proceedings. My bill, also known as the Eviction Legal Services Act, is a critical step toward ensuring justice and fairness in our housing system. Today, we will be speaking to the sub, as you mentioned, and not the original bill. Much work has gone into engaging stakeholders on this legislation to get to the draft. Those stakeholders are here, and we'll be speaking to that process and why the changes were made. I'll be happy to take any questions regarding the changes reflected in the sub at the later time. Evictions can have devastating consequences for families, leading to homelessness, job loss, and a host of other social and economic challenges. Evictions increase the probability of applying to a homeless shelter by 14%. Yet nationally, only about 3% of tenants facing eviction have access to legal representation. This imbalance of power and self versus attorney representation in the courtroom often leads to unjust outcomes. A right to counsel mitigates the harm that can come from eviction. And it works. In New York City, the right to counsel has meant that 84% of represented renters facing eviction have remained in their homes. In Cleveland, 93% of represented renters avoided eviction or an involuntary move. And 83% of the program's clients whose goal was to secure rental assistance were able to do that. House Bill 5237 seeks to rectify this by providing legal services for individuals who are parties to civil actions. The bill outlines a comprehensive plan for providing legal representation to income-eligible individuals. It also provides for educating these individuals about available resources. The sub also structurally changes and improves how the legal counsel program operates, expanding covered proceedings to include more types of court cases while making only summary proceedings mandatory and other types of cases optional. These changes allow us to more responsibly and comprehensively respond to the housing crisis while making the legal right to counsel process more efficient. By providing legal representation to those who cannot afford it, we can ensure that all parties in an eviction proceeding have a fair chance to represent their case. This not only benefits the individuals, but also contributes to the overall integrity of our judicial system. In addition, while not necessary, this vital change would be most effective with the corresponding passage of 5236. 5236, as Representative Reingans mentioned, requires the disclosure of tenants' rights and responsibilities, contact information for United Way's 211 program, and information on legal services. These three important resources not only assist in connecting tenants with legal counsel, they also provide support in getting to many of the root causes of homelessness by connecting tenants with support in times of crisis. I urge you to support 5237. By doing so, we can take a significant step towards creating a more equitable housing system where everyone, regardless of their income, has access to justice. Thank you, Madam Chair. And there are several housing advocates, so I'm open to several of them themselves answering some of the technical questions if you want to move on, and we can take questions later. It's up to you.
That's fine. We can, I know that you do have the three experts who will be giving testimony, so we'll lead with them and then we'll take questions once they have given their testimony. All right, so we will start with Tanya Phillips, who is with the Detroit Right to Counsel Coalition. And then I'll also have Ruth Johnson from CDAD join her, so you guys are ready to. Thank you.
This one.
I'm sorry, please proceed. Yes.
Okay. Good morning to this honorable body. My name is Tanya Myers-Phillips, and I'm the project leader for the Detroit Right to Counsel Coalition. Thank you for allowing me to share information with you today about a civil right to counsel, specifically HB 5237. A right to counsel is having the right to an attorney to defend and represent you in court. In 1963, in Gideon v. Wainwright, the U.S. Supreme Court held that the Sixth Amendment and the 14th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution guarantees persons accused of a crime a right to counsel and requires courts to provide counsel if the defendant is poor and cannot do it on their own. Since that pivotal case 61 years ago, a publicly supported right to counsel in criminal proceedings has become a fundamental part of the state and our legal system. Over the last 10 years, communities have increasingly realized the necessity of the state to provide a right to counsel for persons facing eviction. A right to counsel does not create a special privilege. However, it does allow everyday Michiganders, both tenants and homeowners, to have a fair opportunity to present their case in court. Laws providing a right to counsel in eviction proceedings have been enacted in 17 cities, 5 states, and 1 county. In 2022, the city of Detroit passed a right to counsel law. And last year, the state joined as a partner in providing a grant of $2.5 million towards this life-changing effort. In the state of Washington, over 50% of tenants with legal representation stayed in their homes. Not far away in Cleveland, 81% of tenants stayed in their homes, and 97% who sought monetary relief won. And in New York City, 78% of households represented in eviction proceedings and 87% facing administrative termination remain in their homes. Of nearly 3,000 Detroiters who received full legal representation from 2 agencies funded with state dollars, 65.5% were not evicted and stayed in their homes. One inspiring story among so many is that of Miss Robinson, who came to Detroit to teach. She was facing eviction and was provided attorneys through the Right to Counsel initiative. The Right to Counsel attorneys helped Ms. Robinson prevail in her case and stay in her home. The investment in the Right to Counsel saved a family's home, a city's resident, a community's leader, a school and a classroom full of children's teacher. HB 5237 provides full legal representation, ongoing outreach, education to tenants and landlords, and this will help solve many problems and avoid the need to go to court for many. It provides minimum standards of competency and ongoing education for attorneys. It also provides an advisory board that tenants, service providers, and court representatives will be a part of, along with the requirement to have at least one public meeting to provide ongoing feedback and evaluation. In conclusion, I quote from Justice Black in the Gideon case, quote, "Reason and reflection require us to recognize that in our adversary system of criminal justice, any person hauled into court who is too poor to hire a lawyer cannot be assured a fair trial unless counsel is provided for him," unquote. Similarly, HB 5237 is what we need for a truly fair civil system. And when the system is fair, thousands of Michiganders will not be unjustly evicted and will remain in their homes. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Phillips. We have Ms. Johnson.
Yes. Thank you for this opportunity to comment in support of the sub to House Bill 5237. My name is Ruth Johnson. I am the Public Policy Director for Community Development Advocates of Detroit, affectionately called CDAD, and CDAD is a member of the Detroit Right to Counsel Coalition. Let me tell you a little bit about CDAD and our members. We are a 501c3 nonprofit, nonpartisan organization with over 200 members in the city of Detroit. For 25 years, our members have built, managed, rehabbed, supported, preserved housing, whether that's owner-occupied, rental, temporary, transitional, supportive housing. We have helped people stay in their homes. As CDAD's Public Policy Director and as a proud member of the Detroit Coalition, I want to talk about why I support the creation of a statewide civil right to counsel for tenants. There are 2 primary reasons. First, the state law would be an important tool in our toolbox to address the housing and eviction crises. We have twin crises that are facing Michiganders and Detroiters, but not just affecting tenants, but also affecting landlords and communities. It affects us all. Secondly, based upon the experiences and preliminary results of the Detroit Right to Counsel law, a state law similar to that, but with some added features, would be an effective tool to fight and reduce the number of unnecessary, unjust, and even illegal evictions, and would help keep Michiganders and Detroiters in their homes. Like I said, they're twin crises. Michigan has had a longstanding housing crisis, and you've heard from the folks from Communities First about it. So I don't need to go too much about how that 60% of Michiganders are cost burdened, paying more than 30% of their household income towards housing costs. But then we also have the severely cost burden, where they're paying more than 60% of their household income. And according to a report by the National Low-Income Housing Coalition, the severely cost-burdened households are more likely than other renters to sacrifice other necessities like healthy food and health care to pay for rent, and or experience unstable housing situations like eviction. So let's talk about the eviction crisis we're facing. So on an annual basis, we have about 40,000 Michigan households that lose their homes as a result of court-ordered evictions. This is according to a University of Michigan Poverty Solutions report. Our state is significantly higher eviction rate than neighboring states, other jurisdictions in our area. In 2018, more than 191,000 eviction cases were filed. So that is basically 1 out of 6 renters. That's 17%. While 13 cities and counties with the highest eviction filings are in Southeast Michigan, it is a statewide problem because 32 Michigan counties, or about 37% of Michigan counties, have eviction filing rates of 9.5%. That's equivalent to 1 out of 10 renters. So during the COVID pandemic, we had some relief. There was a decline in eviction filing and a decline in defaults where the the defendant does not appear. So the declines were due to the COVID emergency relief assistance program, some federal and state eviction moratoria, as well as other measures by our Michigan Supreme Court. But unfortunately, since then, the numbers are creeping up. Even before the pandemic, the city of Detroit was facing an epidemic of the eviction crisis, with 31,000 eviction cases were filed annually in our 36th District Court. And 30% of the eviction cases, or nearly 10,000, were forcible eviction by a bailiff, a sheriff's bailiff. That's where there's an order of eviction entered by the court. Prior to 2018, less than 5% of tenants were able to get full legal representation to defend themselves in these evictions. Comparatively, 85 to 90% of landlords were represented by legal counsel. Now, there's some other things going on in Detroit. In 2015, according to U.S. Census data, Detroit became a majority renter city. For the first time in 50 years, 53% of Detroit's populations were tenants. This percentage must be viewed against the fact that at one time, Detroit held the highest rate of black home ownership in the country. Also in 2015, a little under 25,000 properties were lost to foreclosure, the highest number of annual foreclosures in a decade, pushing these former homeowners into renters. Let me tell you about the Detroit Right to Counsel. We worked very hard, the Detroit Right to Counsel Coalition, with the Duggan administration, the Detroit City Council, and many community organizations and stakeholders to pass the right to counsel, as Attorney Phillips said, in 2022. It was actually, started to be implemented March through December of 2023. And during that period of time, 59% of tenants who appeared and were eligible for this right to counsel received full legal representation. Right to counsel allowed more people to retain possession of their homes. Detroit's law preserved the right for future subsidized housing for 100% of the tenants, and none lost their public subsidy due to this court action. Let us work together to create a state civil right to counsel. Let's work together to provide legal representation to tenants like Ms. Robinson, the Detroit school teacher, legal consultation for CDAD members, some who are landlords. They are actually landlords and would appreciate getting some help understanding their rights and responsibilities and resources, as well as tenants need to get more information earlier on to prevent some of the problems we're experiencing with evictions. But also it would provide legal education and community outreach for your constituents. Let's join the growing number of cities, states, and counties that are taking steps to reduce eviction, because the research shows that such interventions have the potential to reduce homelessness, boost school attendance, support employment, and significantly reduce government spending on shelter and other related costs. Let's keep people in their homes. Let's get it done.
Thank you so much, Ms. Johnson. We have one more person, Lisa Chapman from the Public Policy Coalition Against Homelessness, who is going to give testimony, and then we will take questions.
Good morning, and thank you, Subcommittee Chair Grant and committee members, for the opportunity to speak with you today. My name is Lisa Chapman, and I'm the Director of Public Policy for the Michigan Coalition Against Homelessness, a 32-year-old statewide nonprofit and membership organization. We are also a collaborative partner in the Campaign to End Homelessness, which began in 2006. The campaign firmly believes in housing is the most effective solution to end homelessness, and in 2022 recommended the state adopt right to counsel statewide in its policy and budget priorities letter to the governor. The lack of legal counsel and representation for tenants is a widespread and urgent problem facing Michigan renters. According to the U of M Poverty Solutions, less than 5% of Michigan tenants are represented in eviction proceedings, compared with better than 83% of landlords. It is crucial that this disparity is addressed by establishing and funding a guaranteed right to counsel for tenants in eviction cases and eviction diversion programs in every district court. We can't discuss the issue of right to counsel without also talking about eviction, its detrimental effects, and the impact it has on families and communities. An eviction filing against a tenant makes it exponentially harder, if not impossible, for them to qualify for future housing. According to the National Coalition for a Civil Right to Counsel, even a filing of eviction, regardless of the outcome, reduces housing opportunities and can remain on the tenant's record for years. The U of M Poverty Solutions 2020 report stated that Michigan eviction filing rate was double the estimated national rate, and you've heard about that. Eviction is also a racial justice issue, as Black female renters face eviction twice as often as white tenants. Federal emergency assistance, eviction moratoriums, and funding for legal aid representation kept people housed during the pandemic and demonstrated the immense value of those interventions for preventing the harm that evictions cause. During the pandemic, evictions in Michigan fell by 37%, in large part due to rental assistance and funding for legal aid, according to the Campaign to End Homelessness. As these interventions and supports expired in '22, eviction filings rose in Michigan. Stout LLC, a financial analysis company that has produced extensive right to counsel reports for numerous locales, consistently found that a right to counsel leads to more than 90% of tenants avoiding disruptive displacement. Stout estimated in 2023 that the Connecticut statewide right to counsel realized fiscal benefits of between $17.6 million and $21.4 million in 22 months. These benefits ranged from decreased incarceration, unemployment, foster care, Medicaid healthcare spending, and homeless response costs, to increases in educational attainment, employment, and economic stability. National League of Cities reports that the results coming out of right to counsel jurisdictions are stunning, and you've heard some here in previous testimony. In situations where tenants cannot remain in their home, lawyers representing them can effectively negotiate for more time, a smaller rent judgment, and a graceful exit so that eviction will not be on the tenant's record. Represented tenants who vacate their homes are far more likely to obtain new housing and avoid the scarlet E of eviction. A tenant's right to counsel ensures that they have a fair chance to access legal protection and keep them in their homes. And rent-a-counsel helps protect tenants' rights, helps inform decision-making, and has wide-ranging benefits for tenant stability and also maintaining communities. In a time when rents are rising and incomes are not keeping pace, more Michiganders in rental housing are at risk of evictions at rates that are likely back to pre-pandemic, if not higher levels. Rent-a-counsel is an investment in Michigan that far outweighs the cost. We strongly encourage favorable approval of HB 5237 and appreciate the committee for taking up this important topic.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ms. Chapman, and we appreciate the testimony from you all. At this time, I want to see if anyone from the committee has a question. We have two? Okay. So I'll invite Representative Devendorf back up, and if there is someone who you would like to stay with you from testimony to help answer a question, that would be great. And we're going to go to Representative Aragona.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a couple of quick questions. Do we have any estimate, I didn't see any type of fiscal analysis on how much this type of program would cost?
So this type of program is already happening. There just is not the guarantee that folks have access to it. We do have several of these legal services for housing distributed throughout the state, not as many as we need, for sure. And we are at capacity at all of our legal services organizations. But regardless of that, we know that we need to ensure that tenants know that they have this tool in their toolbox, and we have written into the legislation that eviction cases have to be prioritized, so those folks closest to facing eviction have to be prioritized to come first for the legal services organizations until we can build up capacity with more funding and support for our legal services agencies.
Okay, thank you. So on page 5, subsection 4, line 10, it says the legislator shall appropriate money each fiscal period to the statewide funding unit sufficient to provide full legal representation to all covered individuals. I guess I have a little bit of a concern as to whether we're tying the hands of future legislators. So I'm actually wondering if possibly this legislation would get us into some legal troubles. But if we're saying that we shall provide this funding, shouldn't we have some type of fiscal target as to how much we're spending?
I would love a fiscal appropriation for this. In fact, we did reach out to MSHDA, and we've been working with MSHDA throughout this process on this legislation, but we reached out to MSHDA and asked, what is an estimate if we were to meet the full need? And that is to say, what is the very top number to make sure that we can absolutely have legal counsel for everybody would need it? And that number is large. It's $40 million. That is not what we need to authorize every year in order to make sure that we are supporting some legal services organizations and building up capacity. But it does really demonstrate that this is very much needed and that we do need to provide consistent ongoing support. So rather than thinking of it as tying future legislators' hands, I would think of it as allowing a real opportunity for future legislators to ensure we are keeping people in their homes and, as was already offered in testimony, ultimately saving money at the local level and at the state level, because it is less expensive to keep people in their homes, even with a public right to counsel, than it is to continue to try to shift people out.
Okay, thank you. And just one more quick question, Representative. Is there any thought as to, there's obviously large conglomerates that own multiple large developments, right? But there's plenty of landlords out there that own 1 or 2 units at a time. They're not making a lot of money, and the thought process behind, if they have a tenant who they actually do need to evict, however, that tenant can delay this. From what I'm reading, they can delay their eviction through the court proceedings. That's going to add burden to these small mom and pop landlords that just have this development or this 1 or 2 units for some passive income. So how can we make it equitable with them, that we aren't cheating them out of what they've invested in?
Well, our narratives are going to sound a little different because I don't think we're cheating anybody. In this particular case, we have been very careful to think about the mom and pop landlords and the small scale property owners. We don't believe we need an exemption or any carve out for anybody in those circumstances, because good landlords are not impacted by this legislation. They just aren't. Also, as was already offered in testimony, the vast majority of landlords already have representation, and under law, under our Constitution, we're supposed to be guaranteed a defense in civil cases. So it is not even a question of whether we should. We really have to provide this if we are going to continue to back up what we say everybody has a constitutional right to, and we just are not making it happen at this point. So if it is a little bit of extra energy, for a property owner, it's less energy than, again, eviction. And it also is exactly what we need right now, and it provides for an efficient process through the system that already exists to ensure that it is as efficient as possible.
But we can't guarantee any, can we guarantee no onerous lawsuits from any tenants at all?
If the landlords are doing what they should, lawsuits should be significantly diminished.
Okay, I'm going to step in here. We have a question from Representative Fink.
If I may, Representative, I wanted to
I'm sorry, we have so many cards in, and so I just want to make sure we get to those. So if I can allow Representative Fink to do it, and then.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Representative Dorff, I was going to ask about something else, but I just kind of want to follow up on this issue of the constitutional right. I mean, are you talking about the Sixth Amendment right to counsel? I mean, what constitutional right are you talking about?
So as we already discussed to a certain extent, that there is a certain guaranteed right to counsel that we know that this country is very proud of.
But are you talking about the Sixth Amendment? Because the Sixth Amendment starts with the language in all criminal prosecutions. So I'm just asking, what right are you talking about? Where
I'm
does it come
saying
from?
we need consistency at this point for cases that are going through the courts.
Okay, so for the record, I don't know about a Sixth Amendment or other constitutional right to counsel in civil cases, but I'm interested to know if I'm missing something. One of the questions I have is, I guess, also sort of a technical legal question. In Section 7, it says that a resident of the state who essentially should have benefited from this legislation but did not get the benefit of the legislation has standing to bring an action to enforce the act, including but not limited to an action requesting specific performance, injunctive relief, or other equitable remedies. What's that action like? Who is the tenant going to sue? Because the obligations in this bill are on courts and MSHDA. So does that mean they're going to sue the court or who?
So I'm going to let my colleague here, my partner in the work, answer this question because she has had an answer ready for a little bit. Here you go. Thank you.
Thank you very much. There were a couple of questions that were raised that I'd like to be able to speak to. First, in regards to the constitutional protection, I started my remarks with the parallel to the constitutional right to counsel in criminal proceedings and comparing that to the need to have those guarantees publicly supported in civil proceedings for a right to counsel. So right now, the Michigan Supreme Court has mandated that you have a right to counsel, but again, as Justice Blackmun quoted, if you can't afford to pay for an attorney, if you can't get an attorney there, the right is only going so far for you. So this legislation is providing a reflection of our values and a financial commitment to provide that legal representation and the outreach and educational services so all Michiganders would be able to take advantage of it. And we've had funding for legal services through the State Bar of Michigan for decades, but it's always been a tiny, tiny amount, about 4 to 5%. So it's been severely underfunded from a systematic viewpoint for a long time. So the system is already there, and it's general consensus that it works. It's just not funded to the degree that everyone needs it in our state. So I did want to clarify that, and this is a due process and fairness and justice issue. In terms of the cost, I'd encourage this body to, when that fiscal analysis comes back, to also look at the benefits in terms of cost savings in other states and cities that have gone down this road. Not only look at the amount up front, but look at the savings on the back end, because you pay one way or the other. You pay up front or you pay down the road when you have people in homeless shelters, when you have people getting arrested by the police for quote unquote squatting, when children are missing school. There's always a cost, and we're seeing the population loss crisis in Michigan larger than it's ever been before, because people are not only leaving their homes, sometimes
Thank you, Ms. Phillips. I'm sorry. We have
sorry.
such a long list of people who would like to speak today, so I'd really like to stick to the question.
I'll get to it.
Representative Fink did have a question. If you're able to answer that final question, which I believe was, who would a tenant be pursuing with that
Who
Section
would the tenant
7.
bring an action against, yeah?
That's a procedural mechanism that can be brought through the court through motion. And one way to think about it is if a person had ineffective assistance of counsel, which is typically brought in criminal proceedings, you can raise that to the trial court judge to be able to say, essentially, I didn't have counsel, or I didn't have counsel that was up to the standards to meet the case. So that underlying action that proceeded without any legal representation can be a cause for setting aside that particular action. So that is meant to put some teeth behind this as well.
And I'd like to say these civil suits are the intent of them from tenants across the country, as we've seen this implemented, has been to stay in their homes, not to bankrupt a property owner. That isn't the intent. It is to provide a process and representation to ensure that we can develop a compromise, a solution, and keep people in their homes if it's possible.
Thank you very much. Now we are going to move to our comment cards. We will have to limit the time for comment, but I am going to try to, we have just a few moments, and I'm going to try to get to as many individuals as I can. So we are going to start with those who had comments. So I have David Ellis, who is wishing to speak in support of House Bill 5237. I'd also like to call up Erica Farley, who would wish to speak and is in opposition to the bill.
Hi, I'm David Ellis. I'm a renter in downtown Lansing, and I'm asking you to support this bill. This is something I didn't even know needed to be a bill. I just assumed that as a renter, I had the right to counsel just by default. This is kind of shocking news to me that I'm even here having to ask for it to be supported. So, yeah, if you could, that'd be fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And next we have Erica Farley. Joining Erica, we also have Brad Ward, and so we'll be combining your time a little bit here.
Thank you, Chair, and committee members for letting us come testify on HB 5237. Excuse me. I'm going to try to keep this short so I can let Brad talk too. I am the executive director for the Rental Property Owners Association for Kent County and for Michigan. I'm going to speak specifically to the sub and one of the main changes that we had concerns with from the bills introduced, which is removing the section that would also give property owners the right to counsel. The Rental Property Owners Association members, the majority of our membership are small property owners of single-family homes, and the majority of our membership represent themselves in evictions. And so at this point, when we are talking about having legal counsel for tenants, then the majority of our members would not have that opportunity on the other side. And the concern that the evictions at this point we are looking at 3 to 4 months in many jurisdictions around the state, in the district courts, and that would extend that out. And every time that there is rent not being paid, that is a cost that's being absorbed by the property owner, which unfortunately can get passed on to other tenants in their properties because they're absorbing the cost for the mortgage, for taxes, for property upkeep, et cetera. And as we all know that we are in the middle of a housing crisis here in Michigan, throughout the United States, and MSHA has raised that number of housing units that we need, that we want to make sure that we are trying to keep those rental prices down as much as we can, but as we extend out these timelines for evictions, that is going to potentially raise those rents. So I could go on, but I'll let you go, Brad. There you go.
Hi, I'm Brad Ward, Vice President of Public Policy and Legal Affairs for the Michigan Realtors. Our members, much like Erica's, those that are typically housing providers, landlords, fall into that mom and pop category that Representative Aragona mentioned. Eviction is often the last resort. Most of our folks work to keep people in their homes, whether that's payment plans or some other arrangement. But when it does come to eviction, many of them represent themselves in court. I know the bill is introduced, allowed at least one meeting for a property owner in that eviction proceeding. I've only had a chance to kind of cursory review the substitute, but it appears that that has been removed. I think we'd share the same concerns that were raised by, I think, Representative Aragona again, about the cost of this and the availability of legal counsel. If there's not enough money, if there aren't enough legal aid attorneys available, how long does this delay the process? And more delays in the process when you already have someone who has fallen behind in rent just add cost and delay to both the landlord and the tenant as we move forward. I would note as well, the substitute applies to mortgage foreclosures as well as tax foreclosures. We think that if that's the intent, other legislation is required to go into different acts that deal with both of those. The other thing that kind of caught my attention is when you talk about a covered party in the substitute, it seems that the 200% of the poverty line is removed, and that it's almost covered party as anyone who lives in the state of Michigan. I don't know if the intent is to open this up to everyone or not, but that would be another concern of ours.
Thank you very much. And we have two final individuals. And please forgive me if I don't pronounce this correctly. I have Angana Shah with Detroit Action, and then also William Lawrence. So I have about 2 minutes each, if we can do that.
I can be pretty brief. I want to reframe this discussion. We heard the numbers, 70% of people get to stay in their homes, 80%. Please remember that means they had the right to stay. And that means that the people who did not were 10, 20, 30%. No one's cheating landlords. I mean, that means that they didn't have the right to evict them. It's legal counsel. It's not right to stay. It's right to be represented. And once their rights were represented, they did get to stay. So I don't want, it's not a gift. It's literally justice. And another thing, evictions are, they're not just transactional. I mean, you get a dumpster, things are dumped in, all of a sudden you're locked out. So letting the 70, 80% of people who should not have been evicted get counsel to prevent that is not, it's not screwing mom and pop landlords, especially if they really have the right to evict. They'll be evicting that 10, 20, 30%.
Thank you. William Lawrence, I'm the coordinator of the Rennes-Trudam High Coalition. We're a statewide advocacy coalition with 55 member organizations who are tenant associations or housing service providers. And a number of our members do eviction defense and tenant support. And that means they spend a lot of time sitting in eviction court, like every week. And one thing we've noticed from that that we'd like to bring to your attention is that the majority of the names on the docket each week on the landlord side are the same names. It's the major owners, the major property managers. So that is a bulk of who is abusing this process, not the mom and pop landlords that we've heard some concern about here. And of course, these major property owners and managers are very well represented by well-heeled attorneys. Meanwhile, tenants, the majority of the time, have no representation. They're afraid, they're alone, and we know that these proceedings deeply impact their lives. So it's a completely slanted playing field. And when the playing field is slanted, it incentivizes those major property associations to file unjustified eviction claims, knowing that they will have the best representation and their tenants will not. We also know that tenants often facing eviction don't even end up in court because they're unaware of their rights, they don't have representation. And so that's why these specious claims are being filed, because the effect is to push people out so that they, quote unquote, self-evict. and this bill has the potential to prevent that. So this is fundamental to the right to due process. It's a shame that we don't have this already in place and fully funded, and you have the opportunity to right this wrong in this committee. And I would also note just that this idea of right to counsel has been written about extensively and tentatively endorsed in principle by the Justice for All Commission, which is an official initiative of the Michigan Department of Justice, with many attorneys and judges and whatnot who have been looking closely at this issue. Thank you.
Thank you both for your comment, and I would like to thank everyone for your testimony today. The committee looks forward to continuing this conversation. We do not have any absent members today, so Representative. Yeah, we do. Oh, I'm sorry, we do. And Representative Cernoglu moves to excuse absent members without objection, so ordered. There is no more business before the committee today, so we will stand adjourned. Thank you.